Tabo lived in a small village called Motswana in Botswana, a place where the earth was red and the sky stretched endlessly in shades of blue and gold. The village was surrounded by acacia trees and dry riverbeds that would fill with water only during the rainy season. It was a quiet place where everyone knew everyone else, where traditions were kept alive like sacred fires, and where the community moved together like a single organism. Tabo was 28 years old, and he had lived in this village his entire life. His father had been a cattle herder and his father before him, and so the tradition continued. From the time Tabo was a young boy, he learned how to care for animals, how to read the weather and the patterns of clouds, how to survive in a land that could be both generous and harsh. His hands became strong from work, calloused and rough like the earth itself. His mind learned to solve problems that had no easy answers, and his character was shaped by the demands of a life lived close to nature. When Tabo was 12 years old, something happened that changed everything. He was out in the savannah with a small group of cattle when a lion appeared without warning. The great cat was hungry and desperate, and it saw an opportunity. The attack was sudden and violent. The lion's claws raked across Tabo's face, leaving deep marks that burned with pain. The other herders shouted and threw stones, and eventually the lion lost interest and disappeared back into the tall grass. Tabo was rushed back to the village, where the oldest women tended to his wounds with medicinal plants and careful hands. He survived when others might have died. The village elders spoke of his courage, of how he had not cried out in fear even as the lion attacked him. They said that such survival was a sign of strength, a mark of one chosen by the ancestors. But the lion's claws had left a scar across the entire left side of his face, from his forehead down to his jaw. It was a deep scar, jagged and permanent, a physical reminder of that terrible day. As Tabo grew older, he became known throughout the village as a skilled herder and a reliable person. He was honest in his dealings, generous with his time, and patient with both animals and people. If a family's cow became ill, Tabo would come to help without being asked. If someone needed advice about raising cattle or managing their herds, they came to Tabo. If a young boy wanted to learn the skills of herding, Tabo took him under his wing and taught him everything he knew. The village respected him, and many of the older men looked to him for counsel. But there was one thing that Tabo could not change, no matter how hard he worked or how good he was. There was his face and the scar that ran across it like a river of memory. When Tabo turned 18, his parents began to speak with him about marriage. This was the natural next step in a man's life. A man without a wife was not considered fully grown, not truly a man in the eyes of the community. His parents were good people who loved their son, and they wanted him to be happy. They approached families in the village, speaking respectfully about the possibility of Tabo marrying one of their daughters. The responses were always polite but always the same. No thank you. Our daughter deserves better. We cannot accept this match. Some families did not even give them a reason. Others made excuses about already having promised their daughter to someone else, or about planning to move away, or about other matters that made marriage impossible. But Tabo knew the real reason. They saw his scar and they decided he was not worthy of their daughters. The village matchmaker was an elderly woman named Naledi who had helped arrange marriages for many families over the decades. She was respected and wise, and she took Tabo's case seriously. She traveled to neighboring villages, speaking to families about the possibility of a match. She told them about Tabo's good character, about his wealth and cattle, about his reliability and kindness. She explained that his scar was a mark of survival and strength, not of weakness or bad fortune. But even Naledi could not change people's minds. Family after family said no. Women who might have made good wives for Tabo looked at his face and refused to even consider it. At community gatherings, when Tabo approached a group of young women, they would often find reasons to move away. Some would literally turn their backs to him. Others would laugh nervously and whisper to their friends. A few were kind enough to be polite, but their politeness was the kind that comes from pity, not from genuine interest. Years passed. Tabo watched his friends marry. He attended their wedding ceremonies and celebrations. He held their newborn babies and congratulated them on their good fortune. He listened to them speak of the joys of marriage and family life, and he smiled and was genuinely happy for them. But inside, there was a growing hollow feeling, a recognition that what his friends had found might never come to him. Instead of falling into bitterness or anger, Tabo threw himself into his work. He began to expand his cattle herd, trading carefully and managing his animals with great skill. Within a few years, he had more cattle than many of the older men in the village. His wealth grew, but more importantly, his respect grew. People began to seek his advice not just about cattle but about life itself. He became known as a man who was fair, who did not cheat anyone, who was always willing to help those in need. Tabo used his wealth to build a home that was larger and more beautiful than most in the village. It had stone walls and a roof that would not leak during the heavy rains. Inside it was comfortable and well organized. But the home was also empty in the way that only a home without family can be. Tabo lived alone, cooking his own meals, cleaning his own dwelling, spending his evenings reading by firelight or sitting outside under the stars. As the years continued to pass, Tabo began to accept that he might never marry. He was now in his late 20s, and the women who might have been possible matches had moved on to marry other men. The younger women, those who might still be available, looked at him as they always had, with reluctance and something that looked like fear. He had become, in the eyes of his village, a man defined by his scar, and that definition seemed permanent and unchangeable. But Tabo did not stop being kind. He did not stop helping others or contributing to his community. He did not let his disappointment poison his heart or make him cruel. Instead, he lived a quiet life of service, finding meaning in the work he did and in the respect that people showed him, even if they would not allow their daughters to marry him. He was a man waiting for something he had almost given up hope of ever finding. He did not know it yet, but his life was about to change in ways he could never have imagined. The first rains of the season came suddenly, turning the dusty paths of the savannah into rivers of red mud. The sky darkened with thick clouds, and the earth seemed to drink with thirst after months of dryness. It was during this time of change and transformation that a stranger arrived in the village of Motswana, riding on the back of a merchant's cart that was heading to the interior. Her name was Lakuba, and she was a woman of perhaps 26 years old. She had dark skin that seemed to glow in the afternoon light, and her eyes held a depth of sadness that suggested she had seen things no young person should have to see. She wore a simple dress that had once been fine but was now worn and faded from travel. On her head, she carried a single woven basket containing everything she owned in the world. Lakuba had come from Gaborone, the capital city of Botswana, a place of buildings and noise and crowds of people. She had lived there her entire life, born into a merchant family that had done well in business. Her father, a man named Kapano, had been respected throughout the city for his honesty and fair dealings. Her mother, Bongyu, had been known for her grace and her ability to bring people together. Lakuba had grown up in relative comfort, attending a school run by missionaries where she had learned to read and write in English as well as her native language. She was educated, accomplished, and by the standards of her city, she was considered beautiful. But Lakuba's life had fallen apart like a house built on sand when the rains came too hard. Her father had fallen ill first, a sickness that the doctors could not cure. 4 months, Lakuba watched him grow weaker, watched her strong father become a shadow of himself. She sat beside his bed, reading to him and holding his hand, praying to God and to the ancestors that he would recover. But he did not. He died on a day when the sun was shining bright, and Lakuba felt as though the light had left the world forever. Her mother could not bear the grief. Bongyu had loved her husband deeply, and without him, she seemed to lose her reason to live. She stopped going out, stopped caring for herself, and eventually turned to drinking. She would sit alone in the house, consuming beer and wine, becoming someone that her children did not recognize. Lakuba tried to help her, tried to bring her back to life, but there was nothing she could do. Her mother grew weaker and sicker, and within a year of her father's death, she too was gone. Lakuba's grief was overwhelming, but she tried to be strong for her siblings. She had 2 brothers, Tabo and Mfo, who were older than her. She thought they would support each other, that they would hold the family together. But instead, something terrible happened. Her brothers blamed her for not preventing their parents' deaths. They said that if she had been more clever, more determined, more powerful, she could have saved them. The words were cruel and unfair, but Lakuba was too broken with grief to defend herself. When their parents' property was divided, her brothers took the house and most of the money in business. They gave Lakuba nothing, saying that she did not deserve to inherit anything because she had failed to keep the family alive. Then they told her to leave, to go away and never return. Lakuba, stunned and heartbroken, left the only home she had ever known with nothing but the clothes on her back. There was also a man, someone named Jabulani, who had spoken of love and marriage before her parents died. He had promised her a future together, and Lakuba had believed him with the innocent faith of someone who had always been protected and loved. But when she lost her wealth and her family standing, Jabulani disappeared from her life as though she had never existed. He did not even say goodbye. He simply stopped coming to see her and eventually married someone else whose family still had money. Alone in the city with no family, no money, and no prospects, Lakuba became desperate. She did small work for other families, cleaning their homes and cooking their food. She slept in different places, always moving, always uncertain about where she would rest her head at night. The city that had once felt like home now felt like a prison made of stone and cruelty. One day, while working in the home of a woman who was kind to her, Lakuba overheard a conversation about villages in the interior, places where life moved more slowly and where communities still cared for each other. The woman felt pity for this young girl who had lost everything, and she gave Lakuba enough money to pay for passage on a merchant's cart heading inland. And so Lakuba found herself bouncing along in the back of a cart, watching the city fade away behind her and the savannah stretch out ahead of her like an ocean of golden grass. She did not know where she was going or what she would find when she arrived. She knew only that she could not stay where she was, and that she had to find some way to survive. When she arrived in Botswana, the village people gathered to see the stranger. The men noticed her immediately. She was beautiful, yes, but more than that, she carried herself with a dignity that suggested education and refinement. Several young men approached her within the first week, offering marriage and the promise of providing for her. They saw her situation and thought they could use her desperation to make a good bargain. But Lakuba, having been betrayed by a man she trusted, having lost everything to people who claimed to love her, could not afford to trust easily. She kept the men at a distance with polite but firm refusals. She did not want to marry someone who wanted her only because she was vulnerable and beautiful. She did not want to trade her body and her freedom for security that might disappear as quickly as it had come. Instead, she looked for work that would allow her to survive on her own. She began helping the village women with the healing arts that she had learned from her grandmother before she died. She knew how to make poultices from plants, how to deliver babies safely, how to prepare remedies for common illnesses. The women of Botswana, seeing her skill and her genuine desire to help them, began to accept her. Lakuba built herself a small dwelling from clay and thatch, indistinguishable from any other in the village. She created a garden of medicinal herbs and plants, learning which ones grew well in the local soil and which ones she needed to plant differently. She tended to the sick and the injured with patient hands and a gentle spirit. Slowly, week by week, month by month, she began to heal from her own wounds through the act of healing others. The village women began to treat her as one of their own. She was invited to their gatherings, asked for her advice on matters of health and family, welcomed into their circles. She was no longer a complete stranger but not yet fully one of them either. She existed in a kind of in-between space and somehow this suited her perfectly. It was during these quiet days, while she was gathering medicinal herbs at the edge of the village, that Lakuba first noticed the man with the scarred face. The healing gardens where Lakuba spent her afternoons gathering medicinal plants lay at the edge of the village, where the cultivated land gave way to wild savanna. It was a place of profound peace, where the hum of insects and the rustle of wind through grasses created a natural symphony that soothed troubled minds and weary hearts. The acacia trees stood like ancient guardians, their branches spreading wide to offer shade during the hottest part of the day. It was here, in this quiet place between the village and the wilderness, that Lakuba and Tabo began to encounter each other. Their first meeting was unremarkable. Lakuba was gathering roots of the devil's claw plant, kneeling in the red soil with her basket beside her, when she heard the gentle sound of a man's voice. She looked up to see Tabo, kneeling beside a young calf that had become separated from its mother. The animal was distressed, its cries sharp and desperate, echoing across the open land. The calf was panicking, running in circles, not knowing which direction to go or how to find its way back to safety. Lakuba watched as Tabo worked with the frightened animal. He did not try to grab it or force it to do anything. Instead, he spoke to it in low, soothing tones, using words that seemed to calm the animal's fear. He moved slowly and deliberately, making no sudden gestures that might startle the calf further. His hands, when he finally touched the animal, were gentle but confident. He ran his palm along the calf's neck and back, speaking softly all the while, as though having a conversation with a friend. "It is all right, little one," Tabo said in his quiet way. "Your mother is not far. She is looking for you just as you are looking for her. We will find her together." The words seemed nonsensical to Lakuba, who knew that an animal could not understand human speech. Yet somehow the calf seemed to understand not the words themselves but the intention behind them. The animal's panic began to ease, replaced by a kind of trust. Tabo waited until the calf was calm, then made a distinctive whistle, a signal that he had perfected over years of herding cattle. The sound carried across the savanna, and within moments the mother cow appeared, drawn by her instinct and the familiar call. Tabo guided the calf back toward the main herd, ensuring that the reunion was complete and safe. The mother lowed softly to her baby, and the young animal stayed close, reassured by the presence of its parent. When Tabo passed near where Lakuba was kneeling, their eyes met for just a moment. In that brief instant, Lakuba saw something that would stay with her. She saw him look away quickly, his body language suggesting that he expected her to reject him, to turn away in disgust at his scarred face. This small gesture, this automatic assumption of unworthiness, struck something deep within her heart. She understood that feeling intimately, having worn it like a second skin since her family had cast her out and told her she was not worthy of love or respect. After that first encounter, Tabo seemed to find reasons to be in the healing gardens at the same time that Lakuba was there. Whether this was coincidence or intention, Lakuba could not be certain. But she noticed that he was careful never to approach her directly, never to intrude on her space, never to expect anything from her. He would work on his tasks, repairing a fence, herding cattle, tending to animals, always in the same general area but never crowding her or demanding her attention. Their encounters became a pattern, a rhythm that developed naturally over the following weeks. Tabo would bring water to the village well at the same time that Lakuba gathered her herbs. He would work on repairs to the community meeting house while she prepared medicines nearby, grinding dried plants into powder and mixing them with oils and fats to create healing balms. Neither ever spoke much. They did not exchange lengthy conversations or share personal stories. But a silent understanding began to develop between them, the kind of connection that needs no words to be real. Lakuba found herself looking forward to these encounters. She would time her work in the gardens to coincide with Tabo's presence. When she did not see him for a day or two, she felt a small disappointment, a sense that something was missing from her routine. She began to notice details about him that she had not seen before. She noticed the gentleness in his hands, the way he moved with quiet confidence, the way animals and people alike seemed to trust him without question. She noticed that he never spoke harshly to anyone, never raised his voice in anger, never took credit for his work or sought praise for his kindness. Then came the night that changed everything. It began in the evening as Lakuba was preparing to sleep. She felt a slight chill, a feverish sensation that started in her bones and spread through her entire body. By the time night had fully fallen, she was burning with heat. Her body ached as though she had been beaten, and her mind began to wander in and out of consciousness. She lay in her small dwelling, alone, shaking with fever, uncertain whether she would survive this illness or simply fade away as she had often felt like fading away since her family had cast her out. She tried to prepare remedies for herself, but her hands were too weak and shaky to work. She drank water, but the water seemed to evaporate from her skin as soon as she swallowed it. Hour after hour passed in a haze of fever and confusion. She called out for help, but her voice was weak, barely audible beyond the walls of her dwelling. She did not know if anyone could hear her. She did not know if anyone would come. But Tabo had noticed. He had observed that Lakuba had not come to the healing gardens that evening, and he knew that this was unusual. She never missed her evening work unless something was very wrong. When he passed by her dwelling on his way home, he called out to ask if she was well. When she did not answer, he went inside and found her there, burning with fever, delirious and alone. Without hesitation, without waiting to be asked, Tabo sprang into action. He brought water from the cool well and bathed her forehead with cloths, trying to bring down her body temperature. He prepared the very remedies that he had watched her teach others to make, grinding herbs and mixing them with care. He sat beside her, speaking softly, assuring her that she would recover, that she was not alone. As night deepened, Tabo did not leave. Instead, he sat outside her dwelling, keeping watch through the long hours of darkness. He ensured that no wild animals came near, that she was safe and protected. He listened for any sound from inside that might indicate she needed help. He did not sleep. He simply stayed, present and vigilant, a quiet guardian through the night. He did not wait for gratitude or recognition. He did not seek reward or acknowledgement. He asked for nothing in return. He simply helped because a person needed help, and that had always been reason enough for Tabo. When Lakuba's fever finally broke near dawn, when she opened her eyes to full consciousness and clarity, the first thing she saw was Tabo. He was sitting against the wall of her home, sleeping at last, his scar visible in the pale morning light. For the first time, she did not see the scar as a mark of misfortune or ugliness. She saw it as a mark of strength, a testament to survival, a symbol of a man who had endured pain and continued to choose kindness anyway. Lakuba understood then that she had been looking for beauty in all the wrong places all her life. True beauty did not live on the surface of skin or in the shape of a face. True beauty lived in choices made in moments of darkness, in the quiet persistence of kindness, in the willingness to help without expectation of reward, in a heart that had been broken but had chosen not to become bitter. When Tabo woke and saw her watching him with conscious eyes, he began to rise, preparing to leave as he always did, expecting nothing. But this time Lakuba reached out her still weak hand and gently took his. She said only one word in a voice that was barely above a whisper, "Thank you." But in that single word was an entire conversation, an entire world of meaning, a recognition and an acknowledgement and an invitation to be truly seen. 3 months after Lakuba recovered from her fever, the village of Motswana prepared for its most important celebration of the year. The Harvest Festival was a time when the entire community came together to honor the earth's abundance, to give thanks for survival through another difficult year, and to celebrate the bonds that held them together as one people. The festival would last for 7 days, filled with dancing, singing, feasting, and the sharing of stories that had been passed down through generations. The preparations began weeks in advance. Women gathered grain and prepared foods. Men constructed temporary shelters and gathering places. The children ran about in excitement, sensing the joy that was coming. Lakuba had been invited to help with the healing preparations, to ensure that medicinal supplies were ready in case anyone became ill during the festivities. Tabo, as always, worked quietly in the background, helping to organize the cattle and ensuring that the village would have plenty of food for the celebration. The night before the festival was to officially begin, a terrible thing happened. A group of herders had set up a cooking fire at the edge of the village, in an area where the grass was dry from months without rain. One herder, a young man named Kumo who was careless and thoughtless, left the fire unattended while he went to help his friends with other tasks. He did not think about the danger. He did not consider what might happen if the wind changed or if someone else did not notice the flames. The wind, which had been calm all day, suddenly shifted. It began to blow with increasing force from the north, carrying the smell of smoke and dust. The dry grass caught the flames instantly, becoming a roaring inferno that spread faster than a person could run. Within minutes, the fire had grown from a small cooking flame into a massive beast of destruction, racing across the dry savanna toward the village like a living thing with hunger and rage. The first warning came when someone smelled the smoke. Then someone else saw the orange glow on the horizon. Within moments, the entire village knew that disaster was coming. Panic spread through the streets like the fire itself spread across the grass. Women screamed and gathered their children, uncertain where to run or what to do. Men ran about in confusion, shouting orders that contradicted each other. Some families began packing their possessions, trying to decide what was worth saving and what they would have to leave behind. The chief was old and wise, but even he seemed uncertain about how to respond to a danger of this magnitude. It was in this moment of chaos and confusion that Tabo emerged as the voice of calm and reason. He did not wait to be asked. He did not wait for someone else to take charge. He simply began to act, drawing on knowledge accumulated through years of living with these lands, understanding how fire moved and how wind carried it. Tabo stood in the center of the village and began issuing clear, direct orders in a voice that was loud enough to be heard over the noise and panic. "Listen to me," he called out. "We can save our village if we work together. Do not panic. Do not run. Listen to what I tell you and follow my instructions." He organized the men into efficient teams, assigning each group a specific task. Some men were sent to dig fire breaks, long lines cut through the grass and earth that would slow the fire's advance. Other men were told to wet the roofs of the buildings with water and mud, creating barriers that the flames could not easily cross. A third group was tasked with guiding families to safety, moving women, children, and the elderly away from the buildings that were most likely to catch fire. Tabo himself led the strongest men toward the approaching flames, working to redirect the fire's path away from the village's core, trying to guide it toward the open savanna where it could burn itself out without destroying homes and lives. The battle lasted through the entire night. The fire came closer and closer, and the heat became almost unbearable. Men burned their hands and arms while pulling children from threatened homes. Women worked alongside men with the same determination and courage, passing buckets of water with tireless strength, refusing to give up even as exhaustion pulled at their bodies. The flames roared like a beast, consuming everything in their path, but the people of Motswana fought back with an equal determination. Tabo moved through the chaos like a commander of armies, always appearing exactly where he was most needed. When one group of men began to lose courage, he stood with them, working harder than anyone else, showing them that it was possible to continue. When a family became trapped near a building that was beginning to catch fire, Tabo himself ran into the danger and guided them to safety. He never asked anyone to face a danger that he would not face himself. He never commanded from a position of safety. He stood at the front, leading by example, pushing himself beyond exhaustion to save his village. The night seemed endless. The fire burned with intensity that seemed supernatural, as though it would never stop, as though it would consume everything and everyone. But slowly, hour by hour, the battle began to turn. The fire breaks that the men had dug began to take effect, slowing the fire's advance. The wet roofs that had been prepared saved building after building from catching fire. The determination of the people, inspired by Tabo's leadership and example, began to overcome the threat. As the dawn broke, the fire had been contained. It had consumed perhaps a tenth of the village's outlying structures and some of the surrounding grazing land, but the community itself, the heart of Botswana, had been saved. The homes where families lived, the gathering places where people came together, the sacred spaces where traditions were honored, all of these had been preserved. 3 people had been injured during the fight, suffering burns and smoke inhalation, but none had died. The village had survived because one man refused to panic, took charge in the moment of crisis, and inspired others to be courageous when courage seemed impossible. When the community gathered 2 days later to acknowledge those who had saved them, the village chief stood before the entire population. He was an old man, respected for his wisdom, and his words carried weight and meaning. He spoke of bravery and leadership, of the qualities that truly matter in building a strong community. He spoke of sacrifice and selflessness, of putting the needs of others before personal comfort and safety. Then he called Tabo forward. Tabo walked slowly through the crowd, his face showing embarrassment at being the center of attention. The chief placed a traditional beaded collar around Tabo's neck, a symbol of respect and value that had never been bestowed upon him before. He did this in front of the entire village, making a public declaration that Tabo was worthy of honor, that his value was recognized and acknowledged by the community. "This man," the chief said, his voice strong and clear, "has shown us what a true leader looks like." He did not think of himself. He thought only of saving us. He showed no fear. He showed only courage. From this day forward, Tabo is recognized as a protector of our village, and his name will be remembered in the stories we tell our children. The crowd erupted in cheers and ululations, the traditional sounds of joy and celebration. Men clapped him on the back. Women bowed their heads in respect. Even the young children, who had been frightened by the fire, looked at Tabo with new understanding. But Tabo, even in his moment of public recognition and honor, was looking toward the back of the gathered crowd. There stood Likuba, her eyes bright with tears, watching him with an expression that contained more truth than any words could convey. She was seeing him not as the man the village had rejected, not as the man with the scar, but as the man he truly was, the man his deeds had always shown him to be. In her gaze was admiration, respect, and something more, something deeper that would change the course of both their lives. Later that evening, as the celebration continued with singing and dancing throughout the village, Likuba made a decision that would change everything. The music played by traditional drums and instruments filled the air, and people moved and swayed to the rhythms that their ancestors had danced to for generations. The fires that had threatened to destroy the village now served as gathering places where people celebrated their survival and their community. Yet Likuba found herself unable to join in the dancing and festivities. Her mind was focused on one thing, one person, one moment that needed to happen. She stood up from where she had been sitting with the other women, and she began to walk toward the center of the gathering where Tabo stood talking with some of the older men. Her heart was beating hard in her chest, and she could feel the eyes of the village turning toward her. Everyone knew that a woman approaching a man in this way was significant, that it meant something important was about to happen. In their culture, women did not typically take such bold actions. A woman was supposed to wait to be courted, to be chosen. But Likuba had learned through her suffering that sometimes the most important things in life required courage, required breaking with tradition, required taking risks. When she reached Tabo, she took his hand in front of everyone. The village fell silent. The music seemed to pause, as though the drummers themselves were holding their breath to see what would happen next. Tabo looked shocked, his eyes widening in surprise, his body stiffening. He looked at his hand in hers, then at her face, as though trying to understand what this gesture meant. "Tabo," Likuba said, her voice steady and clear, loud enough for everyone to hear, "I have something to say to you and to this village." She paused, gathering her courage. "For months I watched you from a distance. I saw how you moved through this village with kindness and strength. I saw how you helped people without asking for anything in return. I saw how you cared for animals and for the land. But more than anything, I saw you when I was sick and alone, and you stayed with me through the night, asking for nothing, giving everything." She stopped and looked directly into his eyes. "This scar on your face," she said, reaching up and gently touching the mark that ran across his cheek, "is not a mark of weakness or ugliness. It is a mark of survival. It is a mark of a man who faced danger and did not die, who faced rejection and did not become bitter, who faced a broken world and chose to heal it instead of being broken by it. I see your true worth, Tabo. I see the beauty that lives inside you. And I want everyone in this village to know that I see it too." Tears began to run down Tabo's face. He was not a man who cried easily, not a man who showed his emotions openly. But in this moment, with the entire village watching, with the woman he had secretly hoped for declaring his value to everyone, he could not hold back the tears. They streamed down his cheeks, mixing with the dust and smoke from the fires. "I am asking you in front of all these people to walk with me," Lakuba continued. "I am asking you to let me know you, to let me share your life, to let me be part of your story. Will you walk with me, Tabo?" For a moment, Tabo could not speak. He simply nodded, unable to find words that were equal to what he was feeling. Then he found his voice, though it was rough and emotional. "Yes," he said simply. "I will walk with you. I will always walk with you." The village erupted in cheers. The drummers began playing again, their music more joyful than before. Women ululated in celebration. Men shouted their approval. In that moment, the entire community witnessed something that none of them had expected, something that challenged their old assumptions about beauty and worth and who deserved to be loved. In the months that followed, Tabo and Lakuba spent every day together. They walked through the healing gardens, gathering medicinal plants and talking about their dreams for the future. They sat under the acacia trees and shared the stories of their lives, the pain they had endured, the lessons they had learned from their suffering. Tabo told her about the lion attack and how he had learned that survival sometimes required standing still and accepting what could not be changed. Lakuba told him about losing her family and how she had learned that sometimes the family we find is more important than the family we are born into. They planned their future together, dreaming of what they could build. Tabo's wealth, earned through years of hard work with his cattle, would provide the means. Lakuba's knowledge of healing would provide the purpose. Together, they imagined creating something that would serve not just their village but the entire region. 6 months after Lakuba had publicly claimed Tabo as her own, they married. But they did not follow the traditional ceremony that had rejected Tabo before. Instead, they created their own ceremony, one that honored both their stories and their unique journey together. The chief performed the ceremony, acknowledging that this was a union unlike any the village had seen before, but no less valid, no less blessed. Lakuba wore a dress made from cloth that had been dyed with natural plants, beautiful shades of earth and sky. Tabo wore traditional garments, but around his neck he wore the beaded collar that the chief had given him for his bravery. They exchanged vows that they had written themselves, speaking not just of love but of mutual respect, of commitment to helping others, of building a life that would make a difference in the world. The village gathered to celebrate, and even the women who had once rejected Tabo came to offer their blessings. Some felt shame for their past behavior, while others simply accepted that they had been wrong in their judgments. The celebration lasted for 3 days, with feasting and dancing and the sharing of stories about the couple whose love had been born from mutual suffering and mutual understanding. After they married, Tabo and Lakuba began their greatest work. They took Tabo's land and resources and Lakuba's knowledge, and together they built a healing center at the edge of the village. It was a place where people from the surrounding region could come to be healed of physical ailments and emotional wounds. Lakuba taught other women the medicinal arts she had learned, so that knowledge would spread and help more people. Tabo managed the resources and the land, ensuring that the center was always supplied with what it needed. The healing center became known throughout the region as a place of hope and restoration. People came from distant villages, walking for days to reach this place where they could find relief from pain, guidance through trauma, and help in rebuilding their lives. Lakuba worked with the sick and injured with infinite patience, treating them with the same care that Tabo had shown her when she was fevered and alone. The scar on Tabo's face remained visible, but it no longer defined him in the eyes of the community. Instead, it had become a symbol of his strength and resilience. Lakuba's wounds of loss and rejection transformed into wisdom and compassion. Together, they became a living example of what was possible when two broken people chose to heal rather than to harm, when they chose love rather than bitterness. Years passed and the village changed. Young people came from across the region to learn from this couple about courage, redemption, and the transformative power of being truly seen by another person. They came to understand that beauty was not about appearance but about character, that worth was not determined by what others thought but by the choices a person made, that love could grow in the most unexpected places if people were brave enough to look beyond their prejudices. The story of Tabo and Lakuba became a legend that was told around fires during the long nights, a story that was passed down from parents to children, a story that would be remembered long after the two of them were gone. And the lesson that it carried was simple but profound. That sometimes the person you reject is exactly the person you need, that sometimes the greatest beauty is hidden behind what the world considers ugly, and that sometimes the most important journeys of our lives begin when we finally find the courage to truly see another person, and to let ourselves be truly seen in return.